Hey everybody, it's Nightblade Tank time. This is my main tank. So I'm gonna show you the exact build I run it in, and it's also updated for Greymoor. Right now we're still in Harrowstorm on the PS4. Nothing I can do about that, but I did look at all the sets and changes. There's been quite a few, which prompted me to do a couple changes. So we'll get into that in a second. Let's pop a potion and look at our stats. We've got around 18k max magicka, 42k max health, 22k max stamina. Our magicka recovery is 1900, that is with a potion buff active, and our resistances, unbuffed, are at 23, almost 24k. Now, if we quickly get our buffs going, you will see that our resistances go up to 30k. The cap for that is 33k, but then you'll also get some buffs from the healers as well, so you're perfectly fine with 30k. You don't really need more than that. We've got 64 points into health. That's just the way I like to run them. If you'd like to have a little bit more magicka, you can put a couple points into magicka. However, watch out that your stamina is always higher than your magicka, because when you take a synergy, you're gonna get the highest resource back most of the time, and you'll definitely want to get stamina back if you take a synergy. For the Mundus Stone, we're running the Atronach, increasing our magicka recovery. Magicka recovery in general has been quite an issue, or general resource recovery really, because vampirism is no longer good for tanks, to be honest, and we're losing out on the 10% extra magicka recovery and stamina recovery that vampires would get. So, since we did have to drop the vampirism though, I had to look for another way to get resources back and make this build work well. So we're definitely using the Atronach Mundus Stone, and that also brings us to our race. I used to always be a Nord because of the nice resistances and the great ultimate generation. However, especially on Nightblades, compared to my Dragon Knight and Necromancer tanks, the resource management is a little bit rougher on them. At least that's how I feel. So for this patch I decided to go with Imperial. Why that? Because the max health and max stamina bonuses of 2k each are higher, and the red diamond passes reduces the cost of all your abilities by 3%, plus when you deal direct damage you heal yourself and you restore 333 magicka and stamina every 5 seconds. So this helps out a lot with the resource management. It's a shame I had to drop the Nord, because I really love the Nord race for the ultimate regeneration and the increased resistances. However, the max bonuses to health and stamina on an Imperial are higher, and that red diamond passive is really nice this patch for a Nightblade tank. So I'd advise you to go with that. And as you've seen before, our resistances didn't suffer too much. You still got 30k. I changed a bit in the champion points and in the traits of the gear I'm running, so that's alright really. Okay, let's get right into the skills. Frontbar, and this is your damage shield, coming from the one hand and shield skill line, is defensive stance. This is the morph of defensive posture, and what it does is it gives you a damage shield that absorbs up to 13k damage for 6 seconds, and it also scales off your max health. The next harmful direct damage projectile is cast at you will be reflected, plus, and that is a really nice reason to run this shield and not Bone Surge. While you have this equipped, a shield equipped, the amount of damage you can block is increased by 10%, and the cost of blocking is reduced by 10%. So that also helps out a bunch with the resources, because our main bar is our front bar. That's the one where we'll be face tanking things and where we'll be blocking a lot. So having this on the front bar is a really great asset. Plus, this one does about 13k, and Bone Surge is also around 13k, just a tiny bit higher. You do give a synergy with Bone Surge, however, overall, the increased amount of damage you can block, and the reduced cost of blocking is definitely winning here for me. So that's why we're running this. Next up is our heal over time ability. It's Dark Cloak. This comes from the Shadow skill line, And what it does is you shroud yourself in a protective shadow to heal for almost 3k health every 1 second over 8 seconds. This also scales up your max health. You gain minor protection also while you're shrouded, reducing your damage taken by 8%. Now there's two really cool things in here if you know a bit about tank builds and all. First of all, the minor protection we gain, which allows us to run Pierce Armor and not Ransack, because Ransack would give you minor protection, so we can run Pierce Armor and get the major fracture and breach, not just the fracture. We get that from Dark Cloak, and then also the great thing about Dark Cloak is it is a shadow ability, and as you can see in the passives of the shadow skill line, you gain major resolve, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 5k if you cast a shadow ability. So every time you use Dark Cloak, not only do you heal yourself, don't just use it when you heal yourself, you want to keep it up at all times because of the major resolve, increasing your resistances by 5k. You can also see that in the character sheet here, we're at 23k or almost 24k resistances. I pop Dark Cloak, the shadow ability, and it goes up to 29. And the other bit of resistances comes from Mirage, then bringing us all the way up to over 30k. So always keep Dark Cloak up, not only if you need to heal, it's very good for the minor protection and the increased resistances. I'll get into the full passives later though. Next up is Mirage. This comes from the Assassination skill line, starts out as Blur, morph it to Mirage, and what it does is it grants you major evasion and minor resolve, reducing the damage taken from area attacks by 25% and increasing your physical and spell resistances by another 1320 for 26 seconds even. So this skill lasts a lot longer than Dark Cloak, you don't have to reapply it as much. However, these are the two skills you always want to have up because they're great for damage mitigation. This heals you and gives you the major resistance buffs, and this reduces your damage taken from area attacks and gives you the minor resistance buffs. So always keep these two up. Okay, next up are our debuffs on the bosses from the One Hand and Shield skill line again. First up is Heroic Slash. Surprise an enemy with a deep lunge, dealing physical damage and afflicting them with minor maim, reducing their damage done by 15% for 12 seconds. You also gain minor heroism, granting you one ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 12 seconds. So you regenerate ultimate faster if you have this debuff on the boss, plus you're also afflicting them with minor maim, reducing their damage done, which is awesome for tanks, obviously. And then the last skill we've got is our Taunt. This is Pierce Armor, starts out as Puncture, morph it to Pierce Armor. It also deals a little bit of physical damage, and it's taunting the enemy to only attack you for 15 seconds. And it also afflicts them with Major Breach and Fracture, reducing their physical and spell resistance by 5k for 15 seconds as well. So this is your Taunt, and reducing the enemies' resistances. And what you always want to do pretty much is, as I said before, always keep Dark Cloak and Mirage up when you're tanking something, and then always keep Heroic Slash and your Taunt Pierce Armor obviously up. You can see the debuffs over there, over the Atro's head. The little shield to the right is your Taunt. Never let that drop off. If your Taunt drops off, the enemy will go wild on your teammates, and you definitely do not want that. And the other two symbols are the Major Breach and Fracture, reducing the target's physical and spell resistances. So you always want to keep this up, and you always want to keep the maim up from the Heroic Slash. These are the 4 buffs on the front bar pretty much, or the debuffs more say, that you always want to keep up, and obviously you always want to keep your Dark Cloak and Mirage up. And then you block. And this is your tanking bar. Now next up is the ultimate on the front bar, and this is Reviving Barrier. It comes from the PvP skill line. Wait, I passed it. From the support one, you need to be level 6 to unlock it. And what it does is it grants your whole group a damage ward that absorbs up to 18k damage for 30 seconds. The ward also heals you and your allies for almost 10k over 15 seconds. Now on healers, obviously Barrier is stronger, and there would be other options to run for an ultimate, but I'll get into optional skills later on. However, the reason why I prefer this one is because it gives your whole group a damage shield. It's pretty helpful, especially if you're going for harder stuff like Veteran Black Rose Prison or no death runs. And the other reason why we're doing this is also because we lost the Vampirism. But we have a passive here that says for each support ability slotted, we increase our Magicka recovery by 5%, and if you reach rank 9 in support, by 10%. So on your front bar, where you're actually in the face of the boss and face tanking it, you have 10% increased Magicka recovery, just like you would have with the vampire passive. Which is why Reviving Barrier on the front bar is a great skill to have there. Okay, let's move on to the back bar. First up is Blockade of Storms. This is the elemental blockade from the Destruction Staff skill line. Depending on if you want to use an Ice Staff or a Lightning Staff, this will either be Blockade of Ice or Blockade of Storms. And what this does is it slams a... you slam your staff down to create an elemental barrier, dealing magic damage to the target every 1 second. It's not a lot of damage, however, if you look at the very bottom, Blockade of Storms sets concussed enemies off balance. So you have a chance to proc off balance with this. Just looks like this. Always keep it underneath the bosses. And then you just hope that you get an off balance proc out of it, which will result in the enemy or boss taking a lot more damage. Especially if your DPS have this passive here unlocked. Exploiter increases the damage done against off balance enemies by 10%, which would be even more. So they take more damage just by being off balanced, and then even more if your DPS have that passive. It's a nice damage buff. It's probably the main reason why tanks play staves on their back bar. If you want to go the safer route, you can use an Ice Staff. Blockade of Frost would reduce the enemy's movement speed and immobilize chilled enemies. It can't set anything off balance, however you can still proc your Crusher glyph to reduce the boss's resistances. And you could also taunt, because fully charged Frost Staff attacks taunt the enemy for 15 seconds. So that would be an option. And also, while a Frost Staff is equipped, blocking costs Magicka instead of stamina, which is nice on your resource management. So this is up to you, really. I play a Lightning Staff most of the time. However, if you want to take the safer route, you can use an Ice Staff. Just works just as well. Especially if you have some DPS in your group that use lightning staves anyway, or shock damage. This is really up to you. Okay, next up is Silver Leash. This is our chains that we can pull enemies in with. Comes from the Fighters Guild skill line. First thing you unlock is Silver Bolts. Morph that to Silver Leash, and what it does is you fire a Dragonguard's crossbow to pull an enemy to you and reduce their movement speed for a while. It looks like this. Obviously I can't pull my own target arrow in. It costs stamina, so don't spam it, don't use it too often. But this is the chains that sort of the Dragon Knights have the chains, and Nightblades can use this to pull enemies in. However, you see that it costs stamina, and it's not very cheap, so reconsider which enemies you actually have to pull in and which ones you can maybe just far taunt and keep the aggro on you. Okay, the next thing we've got on the back bar is Leeching Strikes. This is important for our sustain, because this causes our light and heavy attacks to heal ourselves, and to also restore 106 stamina for 20 seconds. Fully charged heavy attacks restore twice the value, and you restore up to 4k additional stamina when the effect ends. It lasts for 20 seconds, so you'd do well by just letting it run out and then reapplying it, instead of things like your taunt or heroic slash that you want to definitely reapply before they run out, so the enemy doesn't go berserk on your group. This one, you should actually let it run out just so you get an extra 4k stamina back every 20 seconds, so to speak. So it's always good to keep this up as well. It just looks like this, and then the buff is running for 20 seconds. Next up is our ground control sort of CC ability, and this is Mass Hysteria. Comes from the Shadow skill line as well, which is nice because obviously it can also grant us major resolve on the back bar then by casting it. And what this does is it summons a Dark Spirit to terrify up to 6 enemies, causing them to cower in fear for 5 seconds. So if you got a load of ads in a dungeon or a trial, you can just use this, and if they were running towards you, you use it, and they would just stand still for 5 seconds, allowing your DPS to focus them down and put all their AoEs on them and just kill them faster. This is sort of your keeping enemies in place ability. And then last but not least, on the back bar we have Inner Rage. This comes from the Undaunted skill line, starts out as Inner Fire, morph it to Inner Rage. And what it does is it deals a little bit of magic damage, and just like Pierce Armor, it taunts the enemy to only attack you for 15 seconds, and it is ranged. So I could go taunt this guy from range, and then you can see the little shield above his head again. He'll just attack me for 15 seconds. You can tell if an enemy is taunted, in case if you're new to this game, by the little red flames above their head, as you can see here. From Inner Rage or from Pierce Armor, everything that has these little red flames over their head is taunted to you and will only attack you. You just need to make sure that the taunt is not running out and the enemy doesn't go run off. Alright, last but not least, on the Backbar, also from PvP again, is Aggressive Horn. This comes from the Assault skill line. Starts out as Warhorn, morph it to Aggressive Horn, and what this does is it offers your whole group increased max magicka and stamina by 10% for 30 seconds, and more importantly, it gives them major force, increasing their critical damage done by 15 seconds. By 15% for 10 seconds. So, if you use this ultimate for the next 10 seconds, everybody's critical damage will be increased by 15%, and that can make quite a difference. So you always want to talk to your healers, alternate these horns, say my Warhorn, then the healer pulls theirs after 10 seconds, and then the second healer pulls theirs after another 10 seconds, because you want to have the best possible uptime on major force that you can have. So this is your damage buff for your whole group, and this is your damage shield for your whole group. Alright, let's get into optional skills, because if you're serious about tanking, there are a whole lot. For Nightblades, In-Cap Strike is actually quite good, because while slotted you gain Reef, which restores 100 magicka and stamina when you deal damage with a light attack or heavy attack on an enemy with a negative effect, which they will most likely have since you put debuffs on them. It's also, the damage is actually quite nice. It does 8k disease damage and causing them to take 20% more damage from your attacks for the next while. However, the main reason why you could slot this, if you don't need barrier because your healers are running it maybe, is because of the Reef, which restores 100 magicka and stamina when you deal damage with light attacks and heavy attacks, which you do anyway because you got Leeching Strikes up, which says that you restore health and magic and stamina when you do light attacks. So the tanking playstyle for Nightblades is a little bit different. You want to sort of play like a DPS rotation, keep your buffs up, and then just do skills and little light attacks in between your blocking. So I just go like this, light attack after, and then block again, light attack after, and then block again. You have to get used to it a little bit, but it really helps your sustain because of Leeching Strikes, and you always get a little bit back if you do that. Obviously, Lotus Fan is another optional skill that you could use. This deals magic damage, but more importantly, it afflicts the enemy with minor vulnerability for 10 seconds, increasing all their damage taken by 10%. So if there's nothing to chain in because you're in Cloud Rest or in a boss fight, Leeching Strikes is a nice option for closing gaps and for doing the minor vulnerability, increasing the boss's damage done by everyone in your whole group, obviously. However, this buff can also be given by shock damage or by wardens with the Fetcher Flies. So just ask your group if they already have minor vulnerability, because if they do, then you don't really need this. Piercing Mark afflicts people with major fracture and breach as well, and that is a nice thing if you're not close to the enemy. For example, if you're doing Sunspire and you're far away from the dragon, or tanking him from range, just taunting him with Inner Rage and not with Pierce Armor, which would give you major breach and major fracture, you could run Piercing Mark because you also get major fracture and major breach from there. Relentless Focus is another nice thing to have on a Nightblade tank, especially if you're off tanking and you're trying to do a little bit more damage. You can use the Spectral Bow that deals 10k damage for the light attacks you're doing. And yeah, so it's also a nice skill to have on your bar anyway. In the Shadow skill line, we got Bolstering Darkness. This is actually a pretty cool ultimate if you don't need to run Barrier, even though Barrier, as I said before, helps you with your magicka recovery because of the passives. So I'd probably stick to that more so. But another option would be Bolstering Darkness if you don't have the PvP skill line level yet, which gives you and your allies that step through the field, it's like a little black rune on the ground, major protection, reducing their damage taken by 30%, and then they can also use a synergy on that as well. Another good thing to have, I like to run this in Cloud Rest, for example, is Refreshing Path. This will heal people, and it will also give you major expedition, reducing your movement speed. So every time I tank Samaja and she ports, let's say over here, I just throw a quick Refreshing Path, and then my movement speed is increased, and I can just get to wherever she pops up next a lot faster. Another thing you can do is Dark Shade. This is sort of a minor maim as well, and it summons a little shade that keeps on attacking the boss. It looks like this. There you can see the shade, and it's just attacking the boss, and it's got the minor maim as well. However, all these optional skills aren't really on the build. I'm just showing you what you can do if you want to really go full on Nightblade Tank, what skills are good to have. Soul Siphon is another ultimate that is nice to have, because you and your allies will receive major vitality, increasing your healing received by 30%, and you will heal for 8k and then an additional 21k. So there are situations in which having Soul Siphon comes in pretty handy actually. Another good thing to have is Funnel Health. This is also sort of a heal over time that deals magic damage. Then Debilitate is also a possibility. What this does is you sap an enemy's agility and rack them with pain, dealing magic damage over 10 seconds and reducing your movement speed. And the enemy is also afflicted with minor magic steal, causing you and your allies to restore 300 magic every 1 second when damaging them. So that's an ability you could put on there. And then Power Restriction. Siphon the vigor from the enemy's blood, dealing disease damage, and if an enemy is hit, you reduce their weapon and spell damage by 200 for 8 seconds, and you gain major brutality and sorcery, increasing weapon and spell damage. Now, granted, as a tank, you won't do a lot of damage. However, you reduce the enemy's weapon damage by 200, so that's also, in some rare scenarios, that's also a nice skill to have. If you're wondering where I'd put them, Mass Hysteria you only need for trash mobs because you don't need to fear anything else in place. Silver Leash, which was here, you also only need for trash mobs or if you need to pull adds in during a boss fight. I would not drop any of the skills on the front bar, but these two slots are sort of the ones where you could put optional skills if you wanted to, if you don't need any of the ones that we had here in the original build setup. Also, if you're using ice stuff, you can taunt with a heavy attack on your back bar, so that would free up this slot to run any of these that I just showed you. Spell Wall is another nice ultimate. Reinforce your shield, allowing you to automatically block all attacks at no cost and reflect all projectiles for 7 seconds. So this is pretty good if you need to quickly rest someone while you're under attack, or if you just low on health and resources and you gain a damage shield there for 7 seconds that blocks everything automatically, and you can heavy attack to get some resources back in that time. Shielded Assault is also something that is quite funny. This is sort of a charge, like a gap closer. I don't really think you need that much on Nightblade, to be honest, but what it does is you just rush to the enemy and bash them. It can be quite nice in trials like Halls of Fabrication, where the boss keeps on knocking you back, and once you got knocked back, you want to get there quick again. However, I never really needed it a lot, to be honest. The bow skill line is something you could level up if you have the time to, and if you're running a lot of stuff like Sunspire. I've seen a lot of Nightblade tanks in Sunspire that just want to apply the Crusher Glyph by having a bow on the back bar, and instead of the Elemental Blockade, just run Endless Hail. I prefer the lightning stuff, but it's possible to play with a bow. It's a little bit more risky. However, mostly because these abilities cost stamina, which you need to block. But you could put certain glyph procs on them with either Venom Arrow or Endless Hail. Endless Hail is nicer because it lasts for 14 seconds, but also Venom Arrow works. Plus it does poison damage, and it can also interrupt things which is nice for a range interrupt. Talking about range interrupts, Crushing Shock is another nice thing to have for the Backbar. This is just interrupting enemies. If they're casting something and you cast Crushing Shock on them, they will just be interrupted. It's very helpful for things like Hellra or Veteran Laramar Silok when Celine starts doing her thing, or even Black Rose Prison. You need to interrupt the fire mages at some point, probably if your DPS aren't doing it. So this is nice to have. And Elemental Drain, which gives Major Breach and also applies Minor Magic Steal, is also a nice skill to have on a tank. Immovable is cool to have. This gives you Major Resolve, and it also grants you immunity from knockback abilities. So this is pretty high mitigation, because each piece of heavy armor worn increases the amount of damage you can block in the potency of snare by 5%. So I've seen people use this in Veteran Sunspire. Personally, I did not have to use it, but apparently it's quite nice for some people to use that in Sunspire. And I'm not sure if the knockback immunity would also count for Halls of Fabrication, but you could try it out, certainly. So this is another nice skill to have. Turn Evil, then, you put a rune on the ground that gives you minor protection and major endurance. You already get minor protection as a Nightblade Tank, as I showed you before, but the rune gives you increased stamina recovery, which can also be pretty nice. So that's another nice skill to have if you're serious about main tanking on a Nightblade. Obviously, all of the Undaunted skills, Overflowing Altar, this puts a altar down and everybody in the field, every enemy, will have minor lifesteal applied to them. So if your allies hit the enemies, they will heal themselves just by doing damage. Plus, they can use the Blood Feast synergy, which heals them for 65% of their max health. Shadow Silk reduces the movement speed and deals physical damage and poison damage. Plus, it gives another synergy for your DPS to take, so that's also a nice skill to have as a Nightblade tank. Bone Surge is the other shield that also gives a synergy, also a nice skill to have. And then Mystic Orb is also a nice skill to have as a Nightblade tank. You can either choose the damage version or the healing version of this orb. The reason why I chose the damage version is because when the allies actually activate the combustion synergy, they will do damage that scales off of their max magicka, which is obviously higher than my max magicka if they're mag DPS. And then also it will restore 4k magicka or stamina for your allies if they take the synergy, whichever is higher, depending on if they're mag DDs or stam DDs. Assault, Resolving Vigor is actually a nice skill to have, because the heal, you have a lot of mitigation, so oftentimes you don't need more heals than Dark Cloak. However, there are trials and veteran dungeons where you need bigger heals, and then you can use Vigor, and I'd go for the Resolving Vigor one, because as a tank you want to mostly heal yourself. Culture Ops is also a nice skill to have on a Nightblade tank. There are certainly moments where this comes in handy, just for a bit more AoE damage, and also to have Major Fracture applied to the enemies in like an area of effect, and reduce their physical resistances. Purge is a skill you should have, definitely, because especially in trials like Halls of Fabrication and a couple dungeons, people get like set on fire or poisoned or have other negative buffs on them, and that will allow you to cleanse yourself and your group, removing up to 3 negative effects on them. Efficient Purge is the cheaper version, so I'd go for that morph. And then Mystic Guard. You can create a life bond between you and another player, and while bonded, 30% of the damage they take is redistributed to you. And you also gain minor vitality, increasing your healing received, and the bond will remain until you recast it, or the ally or you move more than 15 meters away from each other. So that's also a very nice skill to have in some niche situations, if one of your DPS is a little bit squishy and you need to give them some backup. Obviously, you want all of your racial skills, whether you're a Northern Imperial or an Argonian. And then also, you want medicinal use to have your potions use. Potions last 30% longer. Exactly. Because then you have like a full uptime on them. They won't run out before you can reapply them. So you can always have them up and always have the higher magicka recovery of 1900. Alright, so much for this. Now, I know that was a lot, but let's go into the passives real quick because they're important for understanding what Nightblade tanks actually do. When an enemy dies within 2 seconds of being damaged by one of your assassination abilities, you restore almost 2k magic or stamina, whichever value is higher, and that will be stamina for us. Now, we're not actively running any of these abilities that do damage on any of our bars. Mirage is more of a shield thing, giving us the damage mitigation. However, if you would run in Cap Strike or even Lotus Fan, that would definitely work for you, so you might want to get it as well. Increase your weapon and spell critical ratings. Why not? I mean, a little bit more damage is always good. And then Hemorrhage increases your critical damage done by 10%. And dealing critical damage grants you and your group minor savagery, increasing the weapon and spell critical rating by 1300. Now, don't underestimate that, because even if you're just light attacking as a tank, now and then you will get a crit in, and that will serve your whole group by giving them minor savagery. So that's definitely a good passive to have as well. In the Shadow ability, just randomly have your health, stamina, and magicka recovery increased by 15%. You definitely want that. Shadow Barrier, that's what I talked about before. You gain major resolve for 6 seconds, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 5k, and then this duration is increased by 25% for each piece of heavy armor worn. Now, Nightblades, I prefer 7 pieces of heavy, because you get more resources back, you have higher resistances, and you have this passive, which just boosts the duration up to almost 17 seconds, so you don't actually have to reapply Dark Cloak every 8 seconds, because the buffs on you, the resistance buffs, will stay for almost 17 seconds. Dark Vigor increases your max health by 3% for every shadow ability slotted. And then Dark Veil increases the duration of your non-invisibility based shadow abilities by 2 seconds, which is also very nice. Siphoning. After drinking a potion, you gain 20 ultimate. That's awesome for tanks, because you can just keep your potions up all the time to have the higher magicka recovery and health recovery. And then, after drinking one, you also gain 20 ultimate. Magicka Flood increases your magicka by 8% while a siphoning ability is slotted. We usually have Leeching Strikes on our Backbar, so we get an 8% max magicka there, which is very nice, because our Backbar skills like Elemental Blockade do cost quite a bit of magicka, and our magicka costing Taunt Inner Fire is also on our Backbar, which means that we'll have a bit more resources to taunt things with the range taunt. Soul Siphoner increasing your healing done by 3% for each siphoning ability slotted. We got 3% here on the Backbar as well. And then casting a siphoning ability generates 2 ultimate, and that can occur every 4 seconds. So also very nice every time you pop Leeching Strikes or you drink a potion, you can just get random ultimate, which is why not being a Nord isn't too bad on Nightblade, because we still have other ways of getting ultimate back, mainly these passives, and then obviously the heroism from Heroic Slash. One Hand and Shield, you want all of these passives because that's your main front bar weapon. And Destruction Staff, you want all of these passives because that's your main back bar weapon. You don't need any of the light or medium armor passives. It's good enough if you just have the heavy armor ones, because we're running 7 pieces of heavy on this build. I will show you the difference in just a second. Fighters Guild, you definitely want this one to make your leash cheaper. And then this one, because if you kill something that is undead, dead, or werewolf, you generate even more ultimate. Undaunted, you definitely want these. Even though we're not wearing any light or heavy armor, we still get 2% more max health, stamina, and magicka. And these, just so when we take an ally's synergy, we restore more resources. Support, magicka 8 is very important for the magicka recovery, because we're running barrier on the front bar. And obviously all of your racial passives, and as I said before, the alchemy passives. Okay, now I'll quickly, let's quickly go into the food for a second. Definitely Bewitched Sugar Skulls. You'll want the health, stamina, and magicka increase, which is an awesome tri-stat thingy, and it's very strong. Plus it also gives you health recovery of 462, which is very nice as well. And it lasts for 2 hours, meaning you don't have to pop new food every hour. If you can't afford these, you can still go with the random purple tri-stat food that gives you max health, magic, and stamina. but as you can see, the values on this are lower as on this. So Bewitched Sugar Skulls is definitely the best food you can get for this. And then potions, you'll want Essence of Health, and you want the one that gives you health, magicka, and stamina back. So this one gives you 9k health, about 7.5k magicka, and 7.5k stamina. And it also increases your stamina recovery, magicka recovery, and health recovery. They're pretty much the same as the Crown Tri-Stat potions. You can also run these if you have a lot of them. Other than that, get the Essence of Health ones with the 3 buffs on them. Alright, let's get into the gear now. Tank gear is a different animal. There is no such thing like a one build that works for every situation, especially depending on the group and the healers, because as a tank, you won't run the set that the other tank is running, for example. Like if the other tank's already wearing Ebon, you don't want to wear Ebon. But if you're the main tank and you're taunting the most, you might want to wear Yolnahkriins, whereas the off tank, who's not taunting anything really because he's just there to give shields or something in certain boss fights, is going to not run Yolnahkriin because he can wear Ebon and stack on the group. So there is not really any build, so what I'm just going to do instead is show you sets that work for me and sets that you can get that are good to have. Now, for the buddy pieces, definitely Yolnahkriins from Sunspire, which gives you max health, minor Aegis, reducing your damage taken, maximum stamina, and when you taunt an enemy, you give yourself and 11 other group members, meaning your whole raid group, minor courage for 15 seconds, increasing their weapon and spell damage. So that's a damage buff set for your whole group, and you get the minor Aegis, the raid buff, pretty much. So Yolnahkriins is one of the #1 sets that you want to have for your buddy. The other set you want to have for your buddy is Ebon. This drops in Crypt of Hearts. This gives you max health, healing taken, and it increases the max health of you and 11 other group members, so again, your whole Trials group by 1k, almost. If you gold it out, it gets closer to 1k. So Ebon and Yolnahkriin are definitely the 2 buddy sets that every tank should have. Other than that, there are a couple of other nice buddy sets to have, such as Plague Doctor, which just randomly gives you a whole heap of health. You get 1,000, 1,000, and another 3,000 almost in the last bonus, and then 4% healing taken. You can also buy this set, so if you're just starting out and you're new to the game, this is a good set to get, so you can have something on while you're starting the farm Yolnahkriins in Ebon. Another nice thing to have for the buddy is Leeching, obviously, which drops in Imperial City Prison. And this will give you max health, healing taken, max health, plus when you take damage, you have a 20% chance to summon a cloud of leeching poison that deals poison damage and heals you for the amount of damage done. So this is good for self-sustain, for not dying. This will keep you healed most of the time because you do take damage a whole lot. And another nice thing to have for a buddy set, for example, would be Battalion Defender. You can just buy that from guild traders. It's a PvP set. And this gives you max health, max stamina, healing done, and after successfully blocking, you heal yourself or a group member within 15 meters of you by 2,200 health. So there is no one build fits all for tanks. In most situations, I'd say 80% of all situations in the game, even maybe even 90, you will run Ebon or Yolnahkriin. So these 2 in Greymoor also are going to be your best bets. You definitely want to get those 2, and then in case you run with a tank that is wearing both of these sets, you might want to get 1 or 2 other sets like Plague Doctor or Battalion Defender to support your group that you can swap out to if you have to. But your buddy sets, main sets, are definitely Ebon and Yolnahkriin. Now, your monster sets, Stonekeepers is still going to be the best set in terms of sustain in Greymoor. Yes, they will nerf it somewhat, but not really. The one piece bonus is kind of like a tri-stat glyph. You gain 500 of everything, stamina, health, and magicka, which is nice for us. And then when you block an attack, you gain a charge stack, and when you gain 6 charges, you release it and restore 5,000 magicka and stamina and heal for almost 6k. They're gonna nerf that down to the half of it, about, like, I think it's about 2,500 last time I looked, 2,480 even. However, you can only, in this patch right now in Herostorm, you can only get 1 stack per second. Even though they will nerf the thing you get from releasing the charges to half of it, they will also nerf the time in which you can get stacks, and you won't be able to get 1 stack per second in Greymoor, but you'll be able to get 1 stack per a quarter second. So you can technically, if you're under complete damage income, you can technically get 4 stacks in a second. And then in the end, that will probably play out as not much less, if not more, stamina back and magicka back than it is right now. So it's not really a nerf. It's actually still quite good. And it might even be better. I could not test it yet because I'm not on PTS. But the way it looks, with like getting 1 stack per second, and then in Greymoor getting 1 stack per quarter second, even though the amount you restore after gaining 6 charges is less, you can obviously fill up these 6 charges a lot faster then. So it will still be the best set in terms of sustain. Other monster sets that you could run: Bloodspawn, which is very nice. This gives you ultimate back and physical and spell resistance by 6k. Earthgore, which is actually a healer set, but it's also nice to have on a tank now and then, because this actually heals people for over 30k health. It can only proc every 35 seconds and only on 1 person. And there'll be changes to these as well in Greymoor, but it'll still be nice for a burst heal. Malubeth the Scourgerer, which will heal you too and give you major vitality. Pirate Skeleton is not a really good option because it puts major defile on you, reducing your healing received. However, if there's nothing else you can get, you might as well go for this. Sentinel of Rakugams is actually a healing thingy. This will put a ground heal on the floor that will also restore magicka and stamina. It's also nice to have on a tank. Swarm Mothers is pretty nice. When you block an attack from a ranged enemy like an archer, you have a chance that a spider silk thingy will come out and pull it to you. So if you're not running Leash, Silver Leash, you might want to use that to pull adds in. Engine Guardian is still a nice option. This will summon a Dwemer, which will randomly restore either health, stamina, or magicka to you every half second for 6 seconds. Torvacoons is also a nice good thing to have on a tank, because this will this will put a green bile on the floor in which enemies will take disease damage and be afflicted with minor maim and minor defile for 4 seconds, reducing the damage done and their healing received. Tremor Scale is going to be a new thing because they're going to change this to a set that actually can reduce the enemy's resistances even more. So if you're not running something like Alkosh, Tremor Scale is a good way to get the boss's resistances down a little bit more. So these are pretty much the typical tank helmets that you want to have. I'd say the best are Stonekeeper, Bloodspawn, and Engine Guardian at the moment, and Thorvacoons. So these are the 4 you're after. Stonekeeper is pretty hard to get because you'll have to do Veteran Frostvault, which is rough. So if you can't get Stonekeeper yet, go for Engine Guardian, because even though it's random, it'll still give you health, stamina, or magicka back, so it's good for your resource management. It's safer for tank beginners. Other than that, you definitely want to get Bloodspawn because of the ultimate regeneration and the resistance buff. Maybe Earthgore for the healing even. And then Thorvacoon because of the maim and defile it does. If you're really good at tanking and you don't need any buffs for yourself, you could also run Symphony of Blades, for example, which would give your team resources back if none of your healers are running that. Or something like Vykosa: when you bash an enemy you've taunted, you frighten them, lowering their weapon and spell damage, which is pretty good if you can time your bashes right to lower their weapon and spell damage when they go for heavy attacks or big attacks. Chudan is something you don't really need on a Nightblade tank because Dark Cloak and our Nightblade passives give us constant major resolve anyway, so that's not really necessary on a Nightblade tank. Lord Warden is nice also for a whole field of you do an AoE field, and everybody of your group who stands in it will get increased physical and spell resistances. Alright, so much for the monster sets. However, Stonekeepers is the best option in my opinion if you're not having to do something like tank the boss in Veteran Asylum Sanctorium where you're all on your own and you don't really have a healer or anything. that can kite you over Earthgore, then Earthgore is a good option. So as I said before, all of this is very situational. There isn't one build that works for everything. Stonekeepers and Yolnahkriins works for a lot of things, but if you're serious about tanking, you want to get all of these sets, because they all have their uses in the game. Okay, let's go to Frontbar sets then. As I said before, I'd show you all the monster sets. Here you got Ebon and Yolnahkriin, which are the most important buddy sets. Then you can get something like Plague Doctor or Leeching if you want to. And then for the main hand sets, we've got Alkosh, which comes from Blockade, and tanks wear this even though it's a stamina DPS set, because when you take a synergy, you reduce the physical and spell resistance of the boss or any enemy hit that's in front of you by almost 3k for 10 seconds. So this is a big debuff on the boss, and it allows your DPS to burn people a lot quicker. You can put this on. This does have no health or stamina bonuses whatsoever though. So you'll have to set up the build like I showed you if you really want to make that work. Another cool thing to have is the dragon stuff, the Akaviri Dragonguard set. This gives you even more magicka recovery, healing taken, maximum health, and it reduces the cost of all your ultimate abilities by 15%, which allows you to pump out more warhorns or barriers or whichever ultimate you decide to run. Another good thing to have on a tank is Morak Tong. This is also a stamina DPS set, but when you deal direct damage, you cause the enemy to take 10% more damage from all poison damage abilities. And especially in Greymoor with the new Venomous Smite set coming out that is supposed to be very strong. If you have a lot of stamina DPS, like say Stamina Dragon Knight, Stamina Necromancers, or a lot of people that do poison damage or wear sets like Venomous Smite, this is actually a very good way to up your whole group's damage, because they'll take 10% more damage from all of the poison abilities that your allies will put on them. Another cool thing to have is Torugs Pact. This is craftable. What this does is it decreases the weapon enchantment cooldown and potency by 30%. So you can use this, and then you can use your glyphs on your weapons a lot more often. They will proc more often. Leeching is a nice thing you can have for the front bar as well. You can pair that well with Ebon or Yolnahkriin if you need a bit of self-heal. What else do we have? Powerful Assault is also a very nice set. When you cast an assault ability, meaning vigor, pretty much, because that's the one assault ability or caltrops that you will have on a tank, you and up to 3 allies within 50 meters will gain an extra 157 weapon and spell damage for 15 seconds. It's also a nice thing to have. Sunderflame is more for Dragon Knight tanks because of the flame damage and the minor breach and fracture, but it's also a good thing to have. Livewire is a fun set because this will apply concussion to enemies within 8 meters of you, meaning that they will be set off balance a lot more. Warrior Poet is also a nice thing to have. This will give you minor toughness, increasing your max health by 10%, and it gives you a whole lot of armor bonuses, so you pretty much get 3k more resistances. If you're wearing this set though, you want to change your CP and get a little bit out of the physical and spell resistance bonuses, because you'll be way over cap. The cap is at 33k. Let's see if we got anything else here that I can talk about. Oloreams is sometimes nice on tanks as well, especially if you're running with 3 DPS. It's a good thing to get. So if you're a tank and you're running Clout Wrist and you get an Oloreams shield and sword and lightning stuff, don't scrap them. Keep them. They're good to have. Eternal Yukida is also a nice set. This drops from Ethereal Archive, or most of the Kraglon trials actually. When you drop below 25% health, you heal for 13k health and generate almost 100 ultimate. This is also very nice. So as I said before, all of this is up to your personal preference and playstyle, and so are most of the glyphs even on your weapons. Let's get into that really quickly. As you can see here, I'm wearing Alkosh right now, Stonekeeper and Yolnahkriin. However, I could also wear Alkosh, Stonekeeper and Ebon. I could also wear Ebon, Engine Guardian and Leeching. This is really down to what content you're in. And and what you like to play, and what buffs your group need most of all to make them more successful and kill things quicker. So 7 heavy on the body. We want a reinforced head to give us a little bit more resistances. We want the big pieces, chest and legs, and infused with tri-stack glyphs. That's how we get a good amount of 22k stamina and almost 19k magicka. So the chest, no matter what set you're running, the chest and the legs and infused with tri-stack glyphs. Head and reinforced. You can also go with infused there if you can deal with a little bit less resistances. And then all of these small pieces you want in sturdy to reduce the cost of blocking. That's very important. You don't want to have less than 4 or 5 pieces sturdy here. So shoulders, hands, feet, and waist in sturdy. The shield trait is up to you. You can do it either reinforced for extra resistances. You can go with infused and put a tri-stack glyph on it if you'd like to have more magicka, health, and stamina. Or you can also put this in sturdy to make your blocking cost even less. So as for the shield, all of these traits are pretty good. You can either get stuff in sturdy or in reinforced or in infused, or even in divines if you want a little bit more magicka recovery from your Atronach Wonderstone. So the shield trait is also up to your personal preference. So is the trait of your one-hander weapon. The 3 traits I would advise you to go for are either defending, which increases your physical and spell resistance on the front bar, or decisive, which increases your ultimate regeneration, or charged if you're playing a shock glyph on it to help with the concussion and off balance. So those are the 3 things you could do. You could either play it in defending, decisive, or charged. If you're doing charged, you want a shock glyph on it though. If you're playing defending or decisive, you can choose between a hardening enchantment, which is a damage shield glyph, which I like because it's a little bit safer. Or you could also go for something like a weakening glyph, which weakens your enemy's attacks. The backbar, however, is pretty much non-negotiable. You'll definitely want this in infused with a crusher enchant. So whether you're running an ice stuff or a lightning stuff, it needs to be infused with a crusher enchant to reduce the target's physical and spell resistance by over 2k for 5 seconds. So this is very important because this is another big resistance debuff on the target. You definitely want that, and your elemental blockade will keep on proccing your glyph at all times. And then the jewelry, you can either get that all in healthy. There's no reason to morph it to triune. I just did that because Alkosh has neither stamina nor health nor magicka bonuses, so they come in robust, which gives you stamina, and I transmuted them all to triune because that's my preferred setup. I just enjoy getting an extra about 1,300 of everything, health, magicka, and stamina, with magicka recovery glyphs. That's very important. You definitely want magicka recovery glyphs on your jewelry to get a good magicka recovery, because a lot of our skills cost magicka, and we want to be able to always keep Dark Cloak and Mirage and everything up. As I said before, most of these tank sets jewelries actually come in healthy, which is perfectly fine. You do not need to retrade that into triune if you don't have the transmute crystals. Just go in with healthy is really alright. A couple of them obviously come in robust because they're actually stamina sets. Those I would morph to probably triune or healthy or even swift if you want to be a little bit faster. This all depends on how you want to run your build, really. Alright, so much for the gear. I know that was a lot of information already. We will quickly check out the difference between 7 heavy and not 7 heavy. So if you look at our character sheet now, which is completely unbuffed, no skills or potions running, we're at 18,300 max magicka, 42.5k max health, 22k max stamina, almost 17k max magicka recovery, and almost 24k resistances. Now, remember the passives that we talked about before. We do get a lot from wearing 7 heavy pieces, especially the uptime on our major resolve, and then also from the heavy armor skill line. We restore 108 magicka and stamina when we take damage for each piece of heavy armor worn. So this helps out a lot with our resources. And then also our max health is increased by 2% for each piece of heavy armor worn, which gives us a lot more max health. And then also our physical and spell resistances are increased by 2,500, which counters out not being a Nord nicely. So there's a lot of reasons to go for 7 heavy on the Magic and Nightblade Tank, in my opinion. Okie doke. So now if we look at the stats again, 18k, 42.5, 22, almost 17, and almost 24. Now if I do that, swap to a light Stonekeeper and a medium Stonekeeper, so I get a little bit more out of the Undaunted passive. We'll go up with Magicka a little bit, but the health will about stay the same, stamina will about stay the same. Magicka recovery is a tiny bit higher, but our resistances suffer a lot. They drop from 24k down to 21.5k. So if I put my buffs up here, buffed, you're still at 28k. So technically the difference is minimal. However, you won't get the bonuses in the uptime of Dark Cloak and not actually Dark Cloak, but in the uptime of Major where was it? Here, Major Resolve. And also you'll not get the heavy armor passives. So you can do what you want really, but I think 7 heavy is definitely the way to go for a Nightblade tank. Okay, let's take a quick look at the champion points and then we're done with this video because it's been very long already. I hope you learned a lot about Nightblade tanking though and how to make a tank build work. So we've got 72 in Ironclad, reducing damage taken against direct damage. 43 and 43 in Hardened Elemental Defender for 10% each physical poison, disease damage, and flame frost shock magic damage reduced. 51 in here for damage over timing reduced by 19%, and then 19 in quick recovery for healing received, and then 21 in heavy armor focus for physical resistance, and 21 in spell shield for spell resistance. It's, in my opinion, it's better to put these points in spell shield and heavy armor focus, because I'd rather have like 500 more resistances on each than having 1% more on each of these, because it won't really make a big difference if you have 10 or 11% in each of those, but it's quite a bunch of CP that you're going to have to put in here. So that's just how I like to go with it. If you're fine with 25k resistances, so you can just drop all these points out of here, spell shield and heavy armor focus, and put them in here, and maybe get Ironclad up to 81. But this is how I like to run the build, and it worked quite fine so far. 40 in Warlord, 16 in Bashing Focus, 8 in Sprinter, 56 into Tenacity, so our fully charged heavy attacks restore more stamina, and then 75 in Arcanist for the Magicka recovery, very important. 66 in Shadow Ward for reduced cost of block, 9 in Tumbling for reduced roll dodge cost, 75 in Blessed for increased healing done, that also is a healing that we do to ourselves. Elfborn 72 for critical healing, in case one of our heals do crit. Nothing in here. And then 23 in Thaumaturge for 10% more damage over time. 56 in Precise Strikes for critical healing with stamina abilities, in case we need to run Vigor and we crit with it, we get a 20% bonus heal. And then 10% here, 43 points in Mighty to increase our physical poison and disease damage. This is mostly in case we're running Leeching or something that does poison damage, so we can get a bit more out of that. And then 1 in Piercing, because I didn't know where else to put it. And that will enable us to get the Last Stand passive. When we fall below 20% health, we gain Major Heroism, granting us 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 9 seconds. Very nice passive as well. Okay, so much for that. I've got a couple Nightblade Tank videos on my build on my channel already. I really hope that this was helpful to you guys. In case you want to run a Nightblade Tank, I think I went over all of these skills, all of the optional skills that are good to use. I went over a whole lot of sets, and I showed you pretty much how to set up a character. You want to have around 19k or 18k magicka, you definitely want to have over 40k health in my opinion, and over 20k stamina. And a good magicka recovery value is around 16 to 18k, even 19 with a potion up. And resistances are fine with this build as well. I go with 7 heavy, as I said before, but you can do light medium if you want that. However, you will lose out on some of your Nightblade passives and your heavy armor passives. Okay, so enjoy this, and let me know how Nightblade tanking is going for you. I'll see you next time.